At the family dinner, my father put down his fork, looked straight at me and said, "You are the most useless child in this house." My mother smirked. My sister rolled her eyes. The room fell silent, but not out of guilt, out of habit. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I just smiled, stood up, and walked out into the night. The air was warm, but it felt like winter inside me. By 7 a.m., I had 42 missed calls from Mom and 1 message from Dad, please. I stared at the screen, took a deep breath, and typed 3 words that ended a lifetime of being their lifeline. Useless is busy. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments so I know you're listening. Or tell me where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Quillen Mercer, and what happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about family love and what it means to finally walk away. If my story touches your heart, please don't forget to subscribe. It helps this small channel grow and reminds me that even in silence, someone out there is listening. Saturday nights at the Mercer house always looked like something out of a suburban magazine, perfect lighting, crystal glasses, my mother's over-decorated roast chicken. But if you sat there long enough, you'd feel the chill hiding under the heat of the lamps. I drove down from Chicago that afternoon, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I meant to, repeating in my head what I was going to say, tell them about the promotion, the engagement, hand Mom the photo album I'd spent weeks making. A family gift, something that might soften the sharp edges of how they saw me. The house looked the same, painted brick-trimmed hedges, the smell of Lenore's perfume leaking through the open door. On the walls framed degrees, awards, photos of my siblings shaking hands with people who mattered. My face wasn't there. It hadn't been since high school. I set the album on the buffet table wrapped in gold paper and took a slow breath. Dinner began the way it always did, my father Grant bragging about Tate's latest startup contract while cutting his chicken like it was a board meeting. My mother beamed, talking about Brielle's big real estate case in the city. "You should have seen her commanding that courtroom," she said, pride dripping from every word. I waited for a pause, a chance to fit in. I opened my mouth. "I actually have some news." The sound of metal hitting porcelain sliced through my sentence. My father's fork clanged against his plate. "You," he said, pointing it at me like a weapon, "are the most useless child in this house." The words didn't surprise me. They landed on me like something long rehearsed. Mom's smirked eyes flicking over me the way you'd glance at a stain. Brielle gave a small laugh, elegant and poisonous. Tate didn't look up from his phone, but his silence felt like agreement. My throat tightened, but not from tears, just pressure. I looked around that table and saw a family that only clapped for its own reflections. I could have argued, listed every award, every client, every hour I'd worked behind the scenes to keep their world turning. But what would be the point? They weren't listening for truth. They were waiting for submission. So I smiled. Not out of kindness, but out of clarity. I pushed my chair back. The sound echoed like a closing door. "Enjoy dinner," I said quietly. I picked up my coat, left the album where it was, and walked toward the front door. As I reached for the handle, I glanced back just once. My mother set her wine glass down right on top of the wrapped album. Gold paper creased under the stem. A small, cruel metaphor she didn't even notice. Outside, the Illinois night was thick and humid. I started the car, headlights washing over the manicured lawn. My phone buzzed in my pocket, family group chat lighting up with new messages. I typed slowly, deliberately. "No more money. Good luck." Then I hit send. As I drove away from Naperville, the radio hummed softly, but the loudest thing in the car was my breathing. I wasn't angry anymore, not even hurt. Just awake. I realized silence, when used right, can be the sharpest reply. Sometimes it's the only one people truly hear. Back in my Logan Square apartment that night, the city lights felt colder than usual. I sat at my kitchen counter, laptop open, spreadsheets glowing back at me. Budgets, timelines, invoices, all the order I built for clients who trusted me to make perfection look effortless. Funny how I could run $1 million event and still feel like the broken piece in my own family. I scrolled through the numbers, cross-checking deposits. Each figure carried a ghost $1,500 a month automatically drafted to my parents' mortgage for the past 4 years. $3,000 for my father's heart surgery last spring. $5,000 to help Brielle finish her law certification when she almost quit. None of them ever asked how I managed it. They just assumed I would. Maybe that was my fault. Maybe I'd trained them to believe I owed them rescue. I wasn't always this composed. I started in events as a gopher, fetching coffee, hauling lights, cleaning up champagne spills while people in suits took credit. I worked my way up project assistant manager, senior PM until last week when my boss slid an envelope across her desk and said, "Congratulations, Quillen. You've earned this." A promotion. A salary that finally felt like breathing room. I had planned to tell them that tonight, to show that I wasn't the background noise of the family, that I had built something on my own, and maybe for once hear my father say he was proud. Instead, I left that house with nothing but a text message and the quiet thrill of a clean break. Maya was the only one who understood. She's a history teacher with a voice that could make chaos sound calm. She called just after midnight. So she said, "How bad was it this time?" Same script, I told her. Different ending. She knew what I meant. I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "You did the right thing, Q. You can't save people who like drowning." Still, after we hung up, guilt crept in like a draft. Families weren't supposed to fracture. You're supposed to forgive, keep showing up, pay what they can't, swallow what you shouldn't. Somewhere along the line, I became the Mercer family's emergency fund for money, for mistakes, for comfort. And maybe that's why I held on for so long. Because once, years ago, my grandfather Walter borrowed a few $100s from me when his pension check was delayed. He mailed me an envelope a week later with every cent and a handwritten note. "Thank you, kid. Family doesn't owe it honors." That line had shaped me. I thought the rest of them would learn it too. I was wrong. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge. I opened a drawer, pulled out the gold-wrapped album I'd rescued from the car, and ran a hand over it. The edges were still faintly creased from where my mother's glass had sat. I slipped it into the bottom drawer of my desk, taped a label on the front, "For later." Someday, I told myself, I'd give it to someone who actually saw me. As I shut the drawer, I caught my reflection in the window, tired, steady, unbroken. I whispered mostly to myself, "I've paid enough for my silence. Now I want my voice back." And in that quiet apartment above the city, it finally felt like I might find it. The city was still half asleep when my phone began to rattle against the kitchen counter. I stared at it through the steam of my coffee, the screen lighting up over and over like an alarm I'd already decided not to answer. 42 missed calls from Mom between 10 p.m. and sunrise. One message from Dad. It said only, "Please." I read the word twice, maybe 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe he'd ever say it to me. Then I typed back, "The only thing that felt true, useless, is busy." I set the phone to Do Not Disturb, slid it into a drawer, and turned the key. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was clean. The kind of quiet you get after months of construction finally stop. For the first time in years, no one was asking for something. I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The Citywide Tech Expo was a week away. My name was printed at the top of every schedule, every memo. My boss had given me full control, and that responsibility felt lighter than the guilt I'd carried home from Naperville. While the rest of the city started waking up, I reviewed vendor contracts and seating charts, fingers steady on the keyboard. Somewhere across town, Mom was probably pacing the kitchen, Dad muttering numbers under his breath, trying to figure out how the mortgage would work without my quiet deposits. I pictured them discovering that their safety net had a pulse and a will of its own. By mid-morning, I'd almost forgotten about the drawer until an email notification pinged. It wasn't for me, but for the family address that I still had synced from years ago, one I'd never bothered to remove. Subject line, "Final notice of foreclosure." My stomach didn't drop. I just stared at the words, feeling an odd sense of calm. I hadn't caused it. I'd simply stopped delaying it. Later that afternoon, Walter called. I hadn't expected him to. "You know what I did this morning?" He asked, his voice rough and slow. "I called your father and told him he ought to be ashamed. Told him he's been bleeding his own son dry. Your mother too." They didn't like that. I laughed quietly. They never do when the truth isn't flattering. He went on. You did right, kid. You drew the line. It's about damn time somebody did. I thanked him. After we hung up, I stood at the window for a long time looking at the city's skyline stretching under a gray-blue sky. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far, but another part stronger now knew I hadn't gone far enough yet. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was teaching them what absence feels like when you've mistaken love for convenience. That night I sat on the couch, the glow of my laptop reflecting in the glass door of the drawer where my phone slept. I whispered to myself, if they call for money, they won't reach me. If they ever call for truth, maybe then I'll listen. 2 weeks passed before I heard another word about Naperville, and by then it came not from my parents, but from Walter. It's happening, he said. The bank's got them cornered. His tone was neither angry nor pitying, just factual, like a doctor reading results you already expected. I was at my desk in the West Loop office, surrounded by color-coded charts and the hum of printers, and I found myself smiling at the irony. My parents had built their entire image around stability, around keeping up appearances. Now that facade was the first thing to fall. The expo planning consumed my days. Meetings, contracts, sponsors, hundreds of moving parts, and somehow I was steering it all. My boss stopped by with a congratulatory note. You're running this whole thing, Mercer. You've earned it. The words landed softly but carried weight. For once, I felt the difference between being needed and being valued. Meanwhile, Naperville unraveled. Lenore called Brielle in tears, asking for help with the mortgage. Brielle called Tate, who didn't answer, then called Mom back, suggesting they ask Quillen since I'd always handled the numbers. That loop of dependence had been the rhythm of our family for years. When the music stopped, none of them knew the steps. From what Walter told me, Dad raged through the house, blaming everyone but himself. He owes us, he shouted. Every parent sacrifices for their kids. This is his payback. Mom tried to calm him but couldn't even convince herself. She'd gotten too used to comfort financed by my silence. Then the first fracture split wider. Brielle found a manila folder tucked in an old box of my things, copies of her tuition invoices with my handwriting on the checks. I'd kept the receipts as proof for tax deductions, nothing more. When she saw my signature, she went quiet for once, realizing that I'd paid off her last semester in full. That discovery turned her world sideways. She had always believed she'd climbed alone. Tate's turn came next. He'd assumed the extra funds Mom received each month were from Dad's investments. When he learned that most of it was money I'd been sending to keep their mortgage afloat, he panicked. The stock he'd sunk his own savings into was failing. He needed cash and found none. Instead of admitting fault, he did what Mercers do best, he blamed. He stopped too soon, he told them. He left us hanging. Through it all, I said nothing. I answered no calls. I showed up to work early, left late, and poured my focus into the expo until I could barely remember the sound of my family's voices. Sometimes, when guilt tried to claw its way back, I'd think of that photo wall in Naperville and the empty space where my picture should have been. The absence was mutual now. Walter called again one evening. He told me he'd visited them, that he'd looked Grant straight in the eye and said, "This is the price of using your son like a bank." He said Mom cried. Dad didn't. He just sat there, jaw tight, staring at the unpaid bills on the table like they were personal insults. I listened quietly, feeling something strange, a mixture of relief and regret. I didn't want them homeless, but I couldn't rescue them without erasing myself all over again. There's a part of me that still wants to drive down there, I admitted to Walter, and another part that wants to see if they can stand without me. He sighed. Sometimes the only way people learn to walk is when you stop carrying them. That night I opened a new document on my laptop and started drafting a proposal for next year's events. My mind was sharp, steady, purposeful. Across town, my family's house was turning into a monument of overdue lessons, cracked walls, unpaid debts, voices rising behind drawn curtains. I didn't cause their fall. I just stopped holding them up. For the first time in my life, I wasn't saving anyone. I was finally saving myself. It was a Friday afternoon when Walter phoned me. His tone was steady, the kind of calm that meant he'd already made up his mind. "I'm done listening to excuses," he said. "I'm calling everyone tonight. It's time they face what they've done. You can listen in if you want. By the time I got home, the sun had already slipped behind the skyline. I set my laptop on the kitchen counter, opened the video call, and muted my microphone. I didn't turn my camera on. 4 familiar faces appeared in a shaky grid, my father Grant, his jaw locked tight. My mother Lenore, eyes already red. My sister Brielle fidgeting with a pen. And Tate, my brother, pretending to scroll his phone like he wasn't really there. Walter's square was the last to light up. He looked tired, but composed. "All right," he began. "Today we're going to talk about the truth. Not money, not favors, not what anyone owes. Just the truth." No one spoke. Walter opened a folder. "For years, Quillen sent money to keep your house from falling apart. $1,500 every month. He paid for your heart surgery, Grant, $3,000 out of his own pocket. He covered $5,000 of Brielle's tuition so she could graduate." He read each line slowly, like a judge reading charges. All of this came from his records. I checked them myself. The silence was brutal. Dad cleared his throat first. He did that on his own. Nobody asked him. Mom's voice was smaller. "We thought it was sharing. Family helping family." Walter looked unimpressed. "Sharing. Then why does only one of you ever give?" I could hear the crack in Brielle's breath. "5,000, she whispered. "He never told me." Her voice broke. Tate mumbled something under his breath, then shut his laptop. His camera went black. Walter wasn't done. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on my parents. "And let's add one more thing. Last year at your mother's funeral, who do you think paid the bills the insurance didn't cover? You took the credit, Grant, but it was Quillen again." My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw twitched. He looked straight at the screen as if trying to find me through it. "I made some bad investments," he muttered. "It wasn't like I meant to steal." The air inside that call turned dense. Mom pressed a hand to her forehead, whispering something that sounded like a prayer. Brielle shook her head, tears running freely. "We let him carry everything," she said. "We called him useless while he saved us." That sentence hit harder than anything else. Walter said nothing for a long moment, then simply folded his papers. "You should all be ashamed," he said quietly. "The boy you called a disappointment is the only adult in this family." Their voices rose at once, anger, excuses, overlapping noise that blurred into static. I sat there listening, their arguments spilling through the speakers like glass breaking on tile. But for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to pick up the pieces. I hovered over the leave meeting button, and when I finally clicked it, the sound vanished in an instant. I leaned back, staring at my own reflection on the blank screen. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was release. The kind that comes when a door closes for good. When people lose their foundation, they finally see what kept them standing. But I had no interest in being their foundation anymore. A month later, dawn poured through my apartment windows, pale and cool. I was dressed for the first day of the Citywide Tech Expo, a suit freshly pressed badge clipped to my pocket when an email notification appeared on my phone. The subject line read, "Account closure confirmation." It was from the bank, my old account, the one I'd used for years to send my parents money. The balance was zero, the account officially closed. For a long minute, I just stood there staring at it. It felt less like an ending, and more like a quiet signature at the bottom of a long, messy chapter. Later that morning, Walter called. His voice was softer now, older somehow. "They're moving out," he said. "The house has been foreclosed. They've got 30 days. He paused, then added, "Don't feel guilty. They built their lives on your silence. You had every right to stop." I thanked him, though part of me still ached. Not for the house, but for the years wasted trying to earn a place in it. News filtered in through Walter in the weeks that followed. Brielle had lost her biggest client after failing to secure the funds she'd once borrowed from me. She sold her car to stay afloat. Tate had taken a night job at a data center, no longer the flashy founder he loved pretending to be. Mom and Dad had gone quiet, their calls fewer, their excuses exhausted. I didn't block them. I just never answered. One afternoon, a white envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a check for $5,000 signed by Brielle. To pay you back, she'd written on the memo line. But when I went to deposit it, the bank declined. It was drawn from an account already frozen. The irony almost made me laugh. I slid the check back into the envelope and placed it in my desk drawer beside the photo album. A week later, Walter called again. "I'm rewriting my will," he said. "Whatever's left, it's yours." I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. "Keep it," I said. "You've given me more than they ever did. You gave me truth." That night, Maya showed me a screenshot on her phone, a message request from Lenore. "Can we talk at Reed? Just talk." I looked at it for a long moment and said, "No. Talking is what got me here." The expo opened the next morning. The convention center was alive with motion light rigs, chatter, applause. As I moved between booths, a voice stopped me. An older man extended his hand. "You're Grant's son, aren't you? I used to play golf with him years ago. He bragged about you once." "Did he?" I asked, surprised. The man nodded. "Said you had your head on straight, that you'd make it further than he ever could." I smiled, a small one, because I knew Dad would never say it to my face. Still, the thought lingered, a faint flicker of humanity behind everything else he'd done. Maybe that was enough. That evening back at the apartment, I sat on the couch watching the city lights flicker like scattered stars. My phone was quiet. No missed calls. No apologies. Just peace. It struck me then that I hadn't won anything. I hadn't punished them or outsmarted them. I'd simply stepped out of a pattern that had been killing me slowly. They weren't ruined because of me. They were ruined because they'd mistaken dependence for love. When you stop paying for other people's mistakes, you don't make them poorer, you just stop keeping them comfortable. For the first time in my life, every dollar I earned, every breath I took belonged entirely to me. When you stop repaying someone else's debt, you finally start investing in your own future. The afternoon light poured golden over the backyard of our new townhouse in Wicker Park, warm enough to soften every edge of the day. The grass was freshly cut, the tables covered in linen that fluttered in the summer breeze, and the faint sound of a guitar drifted through the open door. It wasn't a grand event. Just a few friends, a handful of coworkers, and Walter sitting proudly in the front row. But it felt like the biggest day of my life. Inside, I stood before the mirror, tying my blue-gray tie for the third time. My hands trembled not from fear, but from something gentler, quieter, like the ache of finally exhaling after holding your breath too long. In the reflection, I could see the skyline in the distance, sunlight bouncing off the glass towers, and behind that reflection stood a memory, the dining room in Naperville. The judgment in my father's eyes, my mother's thin smile. For a second, I almost saw that night again, the album left behind the fork slamming down the word useless, echoing like a bell. Then Maya's reflection appeared behind mine, and all of it faded. She was barefoot, her white dress simple and unadorned. "You look like you're about to argue with your tie," she said softly. "Just nerves," I admitted. "Cold feet." "Not even close," I said. "I've been ready since the night I left that house." Her smile carried a warmth that steadied me more than any deep breath could. She straightened my collar, then whispered, "Then it's time." When the music started, everything around me blurred into motion. My friends stood to the side, the hum of laughter filling the air. Walter sat quietly with his cane resting against his knee, the sunlight glinting on his silver watch. As Maya walked toward me, each step she took felt like it was erasing a scar from the past. When we reached each other, I took her hand. The world fell away. I looked into her eyes and saw not the version of me my family had named and shamed, but the man I had chosen to become. I spoke my vows without notes, without hesitation. I promised her peace, not perfection, honesty, not performance. There were no parents standing behind me, no siblings waiting to hug me, and for the first time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like balance. Just before the ceremony began, Walter had handed me a small envelope. "Open it," after he said. Inside was a photograph, faded at the edges. I was maybe 10 years old, holding a broken guitar with both hands, grinning like I didn't know what disappointment was yet. On the back he'd written, "You were always meant to make sound in this world, not just silence." I tucked it into my jacket pocket over my heart. During dinner, as the fairy lights came on, Maya's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and hesitated. "It's from an unknown number," she said quietly. I leaned over. The message read, "Tell Quillen we're proud of him." "Mom." I smiled, slow and small. They need to tell that to themselves, I said, not to me. Walter stayed until the candles burned low, then pulled me aside. You know, he said, his hand firm on my shoulder, I changed my will. But not the way you think. This house, it'll belong to whoever knows how to keep it alive with love, not with money. Today I finally know who that is. He didn't have to say my name. I already knew. When the guests were gone, I helped Maya clear the table. Under one of the chairs, tucked neatly beneath the cushion, I found the family photo album, the same one I'd left in Naperville months ago. Walter must have brought it. The gold wrapping was gone, but the pages were intact. The first picture was of my parents' wedding, the next of all of us as children in the backyard. I ran a hand over the cover, then closed it gently. The book had come full circle. As I turned off the last string of lights, I realized that silence wasn't my enemy anymore. It was proof that peace had finally taken root. I used to walk away from the table without a word. Now I stood before a new one and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't owe anyone anything. And for the first time, that felt like love. The mornings in Wicker Park were quieter than I expected. The city outside was already moving, buses, sighing, trains humming, but inside everything was still. The early autumn light spilled through the window, brushing against the edges of our kitchen table. I stood there with a mug of coffee in my hands, watching dust float in the air like tiny sparks. Maya was still asleep in the bedroom, her hair falling across her face, the pillow barely supporting the softness of her breathing. I opened my laptop, intending to check a client proposal, but an unread email caught my eye. The subject line froze me for a moment. Final notice. Naperville property sold. I clicked it open. The message was brief, just a confirmation that the Mercer house had been repossessed by the bank. I stared at it for a while, waiting for something to rise inside me. Anger, triumph, grief. But nothing came. Only quiet acceptance. It wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Every structure eventually collapses when it's built on denial. I brewed another pot of coffee and went to the small desk by the window. From the top drawer, I took out an envelope, edges worn soft with time. It was Walter's handwriting. His last letter to me, written a few weeks before his health began to fade. "You've done what none of us had the courage to do. Stop. Don't mistake walking away for unkindness. Sometimes it's the only way to keep your heart clean." I folded it back into the envelope and set it next to the photo album he'd brought to the wedding. The two objects sat side by side, one from the past, one from the future. Later that morning, I opened my inbox again and found an email from Brielle. The subject line simply said, "I'm sorry." She wrote about how she'd paid off her debts, taken a job teaching at a community college, and finally understood what it meant to earn peace instead of borrow it. "I used to think you were cold," she wrote, "but now I see it was courage." I replied with just 2 words, "Take care." A week later, news came that Walter had passed away in his sleep. Peaceful, the nurse said. He left no estate, no money, just a handwritten note found on his bedside table for the one who broke the cycle. That was enough. One afternoon, Maya handed me a small envelope that had arrived in the mail, no return address. Inside was a short letter, my father's handwriting unmistakable. "I was wrong. If you ever come back, know that the door is open. Dad." I didn't respond. That night I lit a single candle by the window, its light flickering against the glass like a heartbeat, and let it burn until morning. Months later, at a charity event downtown, I ran into one of my father's old business acquaintances. "You still in touch with your folks?" he asked casually. I shook my head. "No," I said. "But I hope they're doing all right. I've done my part." He nodded, and for a moment there was no pity between us, just understanding. That night walking home, I realized how different the silence felt now. It wasn't hollow. It was whole. I no longer needed apologies, explanations, or closure. The absence itself had become its own kind of music. As the sun rose over the Chicago River, Maya and I crossed the bridge, the wind cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of the city waking. The water below shimmered gold beneath the morning light. I thought of all the words I'd never said, and how somehow that silence had carried me further than any argument ever could. The day my father called me useless, I said nothing. But today, as the world turned quietly around me, I finally heard the sound of my own life, and it was enough. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with a deep breath, the kind you take when you finally set down something heavy you've been carrying for far too long. This one wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about learning that peace isn't what happens when everything is fixed. It's what begins when you stop trying to fix what was never yours to hold. For years I thought love meant staying no matter how much it hurt. I thought forgiveness was measured by how much of yourself you could give away before collapsing. But standing here now in a quiet house with sunlight spilling across a table that I built myself, I know better. Love doesn't chain you to pain, it frees you from it. And sometimes forgiveness doesn't mean going back, it means moving forward without bitterness. When I look back at that dinner table at the faces that once defined my worth, I no longer feel anger. I see people trapped in their own expectations doing the best they knew, which sadly wasn't enough. I used to crave an apology from them. Now I realize I don't need it. Some apologies never come, and that's okay. The moment you stop waiting for them, you reclaim your life. I've learned that silence isn't weakness, it's not surrender. It's a choice, a boundary. It's standing in the storm without shouting back. The world tells you to fight louder to prove your point, to show them what they lost. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away without slamming the door. Because the sound of your own footsteps, steady, calm, unbroken, can echo louder than any argument ever will. If you've ever been called worthless, if you've ever given your all and still been told it wasn't enough, please hear me. You are not what they said you were. You are what you choose to become after you stop listening. Don't measure your value by who clapped for you. Measure it by the peace you feel when you wake up knowing you don't owe anyone an explanation anymore. Maybe you're at your own breaking point right now, the moment where silence feels heavier than words. I want you to know that it won't always feel this way. One day the quiet will stop sounding like emptiness and start sounding like freedom. And when that day comes, you'll understand that peace isn't loud. It's steady. It's the sound of your heartbeat when no one else's approval is dictating its rhythm. If this story found you at the right time, if it reminded you that walking away isn't failure, that setting boundaries is an act of love, that healing is possible even without closure, then I'm grateful you're here. Maybe we don't know each other, but we've probably carried the same kind of hurt in different homes, at different tables, under different names. And maybe that means we're not as alone as we think. Before you go, I want to ask something simple. Say hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. It's a small thing, but it reminds me, and maybe reminds you, that connection still exists, even in silence. That stories like these don't just fade into the dark. They reach someone who needs to hear them. If this touched you, if it made you think of your own family, your own quiet battles, please subscribe. Not because it helps the channel grow, though it does, but because it means you believe in stories that heal instead of hurt. Stories that don't shout for attention but whisper truth in ways that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Wherever you are, in a kitchen full of noise or a small apartment filled with calm, I hope you find your version of peace. Not the kind someone else defines, but the kind that makes you feel whole. Because in the end, that's all any of us are really searching for. And when you do find it, when you finally breathe without the weight of being misunderstood, I hope you'll remember this silence isn't empty. It's the sound of you becoming who you were always meant to be. So if you're here listening to this, take a moment to look around you, the light spilling through your window, the hum of life outside, the quiet proof that you made it through. You're still standing, still trying, still capable of love that doesn't destroy you. That's strength. That's survival. And it deserves to be seen. So stay a little while. Leave a word below. Tell me how far this story reached. Or just say you're here. Because sometimes knowing someone is listening is all the hope a story needs to keep going.